All right, good morning and welcome to this week's Downtown Download. This is Downtown Partnership's webinar series focused on COVID-19 recovery with me, Councilman Costello, and a number of special guests, as you see. Over the past couple months, we've interviewed guests with a focus on how various industry sectors are coping with COVID-19. Our guests have included officials from all levels of government, including U.S. Senators Van Hollen and Cardin, State Senators Ferguson and Hayes, and State Delegate Learman, as well as experts from the restaurant and hospitality industry, arts organizations. We even had a candid conversation about police reform with Commissioner Michael S. Harrison and Ray Kelly, the lead community liaison for Baltimore's consent decree monitoring team. And last week, we even spoke with the Orioles about the return of baseball to Camden Yards. So this week is a little bit different. We're releasing our annual State of Downtown report. The State of Downtown is presented by Gallagher, Evelius, and Jones. Lead sponsors include the Baltimore Development Corporation, M&T Bank, and T. Rowe Price. Patron sponsors, Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business, Vicinity Energy, and the Daily Record, and our community partners are BCT Architects and the Whiting Contractor Company. We thank you all for making this possible. This event was originally scheduled for March 26th. That was the same day as the Orioles home opener. We had about 500 leaders from business and government looking to pack the ballroom at the Hyatt Hotel. We all know what happened, but nevertheless, we're here today with more than 325 registered and the ability to replay this webinar. And so we look forward to having the information continue to flow. This webinar will be located on our website, godowntownbaltimore.com. The State of Downtown report is a look back. It's an analysis of how the economic heart of Baltimore performed in 2019. Which, as you're about to hear, was a very good year for Baltimore's economy. But with the world shut down in response to the pandemic, we struggled whether or not to even present this data. It's hard to look back at a better time knowing that many of our businesses, our residents, our attractions are hurting at this time from an economic perspective. And so we want to really look at this report as a benchmark of where we were before the global pandemic, see how we entered this in a strong position, learn how our institutions are resilient, and recognize that we will get through this together. So after months of being shut in, we're reminded now more than ever how important human connection is. What we see is our city is hungry to go back to school, to dine out, to take in professional sports, arts, and events. These are things that will bring people and commerce back into downtown for the benefit of the entire city, for our region, for our country. And it's comforting to think about Baltimore's strong past as a prelude to the recovery ahead. So today, we have a few guests. I want to just highlight our agenda for today and tell you who you'll hear from, what you'll hear about. You'll first hear from our interim board chair, Marc Wasserman. Marc is known for his extensive career and connections with elected officials, lawmakers, and influential people. You want to know somebody, you call Marc. He's been an invaluable partner to the growth of the partnership, and he's also been my trusted advisor in ensuring the sustainability and the growth of our organization. Welcome, Marc. Followed by Marc, we'll have Councilman Costello. He'll take the stage. Councilman Costello, I know he's very familiar to you. He represents the 11th district in the city. He's the chairman of the city's council budget and appropriations, legislative investigation committee, among other roles. And I have the pleasure of serving with him as the co-chair of the mayor's small business COVID-19 task force. Then I'll provide a high-level overview of the State of Downtown report. Immediately following this webinar, you'll see the report is available on our website, godowntownbaltimore.com. And then we're pleased today to be joined by three people from Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business, which is a tremendous downtown asset, I might add. We'll have first Dr. Lindsay Thompson, an ethicist and associate professor whose scholarship focus on disruptive social change in business, society, and corporate culture. She'll be followed by Dr. Kevin Frick. He's a professor and vice dean for education at the Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business. He also leads Carey's Office of Education, as well as all aspects of student development and international collaboration efforts in China, which is a great transition on how we'll end with How You. How is an alum of Cary's Global MBA Charter Class of 2012. He currently serves on the Dean's Advisory Council, and he's president of Cary's Beijing Alumni Club. So as you can see, power-packed agenda today. I will now transition it to Marc Wasserman. Marc, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for tuning in. What we're about to do this morning is a testament to the need to adapt to these strange and challenging times. 100 days seems like an eternity. And here we are, Zooming, following our new leader, and preparing to charge into the unknown which awaits Baltimore's downtown. But you know what? Downtown is enduring. Downtown must redefine and respond. And resilience has to be our watchword as we go forward. So this morning, we're going to look back just a little bit. We're going to take stock. We're going to roll up our collective sleeves, and we're going to prepare for change. But there is fundamental strength amidst all the challenges we face, and it's in our collective hands. That's the only conclusion we can reach. So a little bit about the download. This is a great way. It's proven to be a very effective way for us to build community. And we're very appreciative that you're tuning into us. I want to throw some bouquets to Councilman Costello and Shalonda and the Downtown Partnership staff for adapting and finding this way to communicate with our community. And there's a whole bunch of you taking part this morning. And finally, before I clear out, I want to make sure that you know, all of you listening, that we are indebted to our sponsors and supporters who maintained their support when the switch to this virtual format was necessitated. We cannot thank them enough. So now I'll clear the stage and on with this important show.
Thank you so much, Marc. Really appreciate your leadership here. I'm going to now transition it to you, Councilman Costello.
Thanks, Shalonda. I have two quick updates on the city side of things. Trash and recycling service resumed at full strength yesterday, all throughout the city, not just in downtown. There were a number of issues with service due to a number of solid waste division employees either testing positive for COVID-19 or self-quarantining. So you should see that service pick back up this week. And secondly, the city announced yesterday $15 million in temporary rent support for folks who have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. So when we move on to the next segment of the show, I will be sure to post that information in the chat window. I'm just excited to be here today. You know, downtown is an incredibly important neighborhood. As many of you know, you hear us often say this, whether it's folks at the partnership, myself, other colleagues in elected office. Downtown's the fastest growing residential neighborhood in the city. It also has more jobs than any other neighborhood in the city. Downtown is the center of it, and as downtown goes, the city of Baltimore goes. And that's why this work, this collaboration, this partnership is incredibly important to make sure that downtown is successful, to make sure that our neighbors around downtown and throughout all of the city are successful. So with that, I do want to take one moment to thank Marc for your leadership and guidance and advice along the way. I know this is your first State of Downtown as chair of the board. And also want to say thank you to Shalonda and congratulate you on the new permanent position as president of Downtown Partnership. Shalonda, I've been on the phone, on Zooms, text messages, 15, 20, 30 times a day since all this began, working together to co-chair the mayor's Small Business Recovery Task Force, another subcommittee, et cetera. But it's been wonderful to work with you, and Shalonda, I'm excited about what the future holds as we continue to collaborate to help move downtown and the city forward. So thank you, Shalonda, back to you.
Thank you so much, Councilman Costello. I can't say enough words. You, Marc, I mean, literally, this is a love fest here, and I really appreciate it, but you said the key word, and it's collaboration. And you'll see even from our other panelists as we get through this, that's the key to our recovery in the end. And so with that, I will transition to give a high-level overview, as I mentioned, of the report, just pulling out some key points there, and then transition back to our Q&A. So first, just want to sort of level set a little bit as a baseline of what we're talking about when we say downtown. So our State of Downtown report covers an area that's a 1 mile radius with the epicenter that's at Pratt and Light Streets. And so based on that data, what we know is employment grew for more than 119,000 in 2018 to nearly 125,000 in 2019. And so that tremendous growth moved us up a spot in the national rankings of downtown employment density. And so we now rank 13th for jobs. That's ahead of Dallas and just behind Denver. Office vacancy rates showed a slight improvement as well, changing from 18% in 2018 to 17.5% in 2019. In terms of housing, you mentioned it, Councilman, we have nearly 43,000 residents, and our population remained relatively steady. Downtown Baltimore does rank 12th in the nation for population density, and so that's right behind Miami, but it's ahead of places like Atlanta and Houston. Our housing occupancy dipped slightly from 96.5% in 2018 to 93.5% in 2019 as new inventory took hold, like the Luminary that's in Charles Center, 405 West Redwood Street in the Bromo Arts District, and Liberty and Harbor East as they hit the market. Several of our newer properties were leasing up, though, well ahead of schedule. It's also worth noting, especially at a time like this, that approximately 1/4 of all downtown Baltimore multifamily housing is affordable housing under the HUD guidelines, and that number exceeds the national average. And from a retail perspective, retail sales increased to $1.2 billion. That was from $1.1 billion in 2019. And there were plenty of restaurant openings, everything there. But at 12.9%, the overall vacancy rate for multi-tenant retail properties did remain higher than Metro region as a whole. And so we attribute this to unused space at places like the Harbor Place, Best Buy shadow space at Lockwood Place. Those are two primary reasons for some of the higher vacancies, but we recognized that that was an area that we needed to really take hold of. In terms of hospitality and hotels, our tourism sector was very robust with increases in both the total number of visitors, and that was about 26.7 million, and the number of overnight visitors, which is about 10.7 million. And so visitor spending was also up from about 5.7 billion to 5.9 billion. Downtown neighborhoods have the largest concentration of hotels in the city, and that's approximately 9,624 rooms towards the end of last year, and that's with another 963 rooms that were in the planning at the beginning of this year. And so you see the boom and the thrive that we had in the economy. When you look at the transition though, and like I said, we talked about where all of that was great, you look at the transition of what happened with COVID-19 and its impact, and we're not, Pollyanna in a sense of how we're looking at it. Part of what we make sure is that we also gave sort of the counterpoints to where we are at this point in time. And so since our State of Downtown data was collected pre-COVID, this spring and the summers were, monitored a way if the pandemic was affecting downtown's economy. We conducted two related studies. The first measured the economic impact of the early stages of the shutdown. And so we reached out to about 150 downtown businesses across a range of industry types. These were, combined, these companies had roughly 71,000 of downtown employees. So when you look at that data, more than half of the company's estimated revenues decreased of 50% or more. 22% of those businesses had enough capital to ride out a 1 to 3 month shutdown. 16% said that they could survive between 3 and 6 months, and 13% said they could last up to a year. Fully 32% of them had enough capital to endure a shutdown of more than a year. So that shows the resiliency of some of those businesses. At the same time, we recognize there'll be tremendous impact. Almost 30% of the companies said it would take them about 1 to 3 months before they would be able to reopen. 23% said it would take them up to 6 months. And as a reminder, we reached out to these businesses early on. And at that point in time, PPE was much harder to acquire. And so from our conversations with them and just understanding where things are post sort of the lockdown, we recognize that, they're capable of reopening and as things have started to lift. 94% of them now say they've been adversely affected by the shutdown. And I suspect that number has probably grown closer to 100% as we're learning more and more about the effects and the length of the impact of COVID. So our downtown businesses are mostly capable of reopening in some form, but how do people feel with that? And so, we conducted a consumer sentiment survey that focused particularly on the restaurant industry, but is insightful office managers as they plan for the return of staff. What we recognize in that point is businesses may be ready to come back in various forms, but will the community be ready to come back? And we know we need them to show support. And what would that take? Of them, 81% of our respondents said they would prefer curbside or outdoor dining over dining inside for the foreseeable future. And that mirrored similar national studies. The overwhelming majority of people, between 75 and 100%, want staff to be masked. They, excuse me, they want to make sure that staff has gone through special safety and sanitation training and offer options for contactless payments. Looking at the sort of city economic data, Baltimore's economy as a whole by late spring, more than 2.1 billion in labor and income and 5.1 trillion in economic output have been adversely affected by COVID. So both the impact and consumer sentiment studies were conducted before the state and city began lifting their lockdowns on restrictions, before we knew as much as we do. And so there's a lot more unknowns that we have as we gather the data. And we want to make sure that we'll continue to update this data and provide periodic snapshots in the coming months to keep track of sort of near and far term where we are, modeling the business landscape. And so I want to make sure that with all of that, we started out with the good, we talked about where we are and the reality of this, but as we look at all of this, part of what we know is together we can do this, we can come back. And want you to know that the resources are available for you. You can download the economic reports on our website, godowntownbaltimore.com. Please continue to follow our social channels for news and information, all of these things like Downtown Partnership. I know many organizations are stepping up to figure out ways they can engage, they can support, that we can connect to make sure that we get back to where we were. So obviously the economy that we documented in the report has changed. We want to bring some expert perspectives on what recovery looks like. And so I'd like to welcome my first panelist to the stage, Dr. Thompson, if you will join us. In addition to the bio that I mentioned about you earlier, I know you also initiated the Cary City Labs to create innovative collaborations that will transform the economic geography of post-industrial cities by creating a sustainable habitat, healthy people, cohesive communities, engaged citizens, and shared prosperity, all of what we want and we want to hear about this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. You notice in that list of what makes a city livable, the wealth part comes last. I mean, you look at, people like to focus on money, but what are the underlying values that drive value creation? And it really starts with people and people in place and how people connect to place. And I think we're doing, in terms of recovery, we are doing a lot of things right in Baltimore. And I think we just need to power on and continue doing what we've been doing. We've been focusing on restoring and repairing and revitalizing our harbor and waterfront, and really looking at it. It's fascinating to see what's going around the aquarium and different places where we are really trying to bring back some of the wetlands and make the harbor more sustainable in terms of weather and climate. And that's a very important thing to be able to do to preserve our property and around the harbor. And we have been really working on investing in people, investing in our schools, bringing back the youth centers. I think we are all, especially after being kind of stuck at home with our families, as much as we love them, we want to connect with other people. I think we all have been seeing how important it is to invest in people, and that the health of people is really connected to the wealth of our community. That 80% of the traded value of the stock market right now is intangible value, and almost all of that comes from the human creativity that figures out how to create value. And if you look at the comparison with 1970, 80% of the traded value in the stock market was intangible goods. And even now, the tangible goods that we do create, and I think we really need to sort of bring back our small manufacturing culture in Baltimore. Most of the tangible goods that we're creating, we're trying to figure out how to make them smart. So we're combining, in the fourth industrial revolution, we're combining smart stuff and AI with material goods and also with human bodies. So we're looking at this intersection of this new wave of prosperity that's really bringing together the human body, the human mind, and artificial intelligence and technology and material things. And I think what we're doing in Baltimore is we're really putting the pieces together to make that work and become an epicenter of the fourth industrial revolution.
I love it. I love it. Epicenter is the key. And so as you think about part of what we just talked about and what you're talking about now in our sort of downtown, we make up barely 4% of the city's total area, but we provide 16% of Baltimore's total income tax revenue, 17% of the real estate taxes, 75% of the parking tax. All of those things I know are money, which you said are the second part of that. But the sort of thing that's keeping me up at night, and it's the human factor too, with all of these things happening and more people continuing to work from home, all of the smart pieces that you're talking about, how does the commercial real estate industry adapt?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think we have started on the road to fixing that by undoing this sort of artificial separation that started in the 50s and 60s of we have separate neighborhoods for living and separate neighborhoods for working. So we concentrate wealth creation in the downtown business. Well, people don't live that way anymore. And we don't look at, and especially now that we've been all working from home, we realize that the household is also a site of production, and especially, intellectual and intangible value creation. So people want to live near where they work. And so I think we are already on a path of making downtown a whole community of living, working, culture, commerce, is all together. And so I think if we really complete that transition so that we're not totally dependent on business, we are a whole community where culture, commerce, community is all together.
Absolutely.
I think we will continue on a trajectory of a commonwealth.
No, you're exactly right. And you look at how we started, I know even around the world, offices are reconfiguring to sort of maximize those spaces for all that you talked about. And now you add in the social distancing component to that as well. So to expand even beyond offices, what do you think about what we should be thinking about in adapting even our public spaces now in light of COVID in a way that encourages that social equity you talk about?
I think we also have done a really good job with that because we have this huge inner harbor walk, almost 35 miles of harbor perimeter within the city limit. And when you think about that, we made a decision that we weren't going to privatize that valuable harborfront, waterfront property. We were going to make it available. So it's a shared space, it's a public space. We have really an urban commons where we have lots of space for people to gather around our harbor. And we really have protected that as an investment in the urban commons that's accessible to everybody. So I think we have the kind of spaces where we can spread out and socialize and build and maintain relationships and all the kinds of things that we love to do, and just build on that good start that we've already made.
No, I think you're exactly right. And it's interesting because people sometimes think of downtown as sort of this one conglomerate where we do have different neighborhoods. And within those neighborhoods, there are also other park spaces and different things to even build upon and expand beyond, even with the harbor offer. So you're exactly right. In our previous conversations, though, one of the things that I know you described when you talked about Baltimore is you talked about Baltimore as a hub of a wheel that serves as a nexus point for adjacent neighborhoods. And so how do you think we leverage that role to improve economic and that cultural connectivity you talked about?
Well, I think this is a really cool possibility for us to kind of leverage our potential as a wealth creating city. And when you look at the adjacent neighborhoods, the thing that comes up sort of glaring in some of the conversations I'm in is that we've got these wings of the black butterfly. And some of these adjacent neighborhoods are desperately poor, but in order to get to downtown, you have to go through these neighborhoods. So instead of having these commuter corridors where you zip through, like Martin Luther King Boulevard, Central Avenue, Pratt Street, Lombard, like zip, 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 slow everything down and make those community street neighborhoods of street life. One of the great things about moving everything outdoors is a vibrant street life is the biggest crime reducer in the world.
It really is.
So if we're all outside and instead of just zipping cars through on our corridors, we have these connecting corridors that in order to get anywhere, you have to go through downtown, but it's a great journey. You slow it down, you've got people and spaces, you've got commerce. I think we do have to invest in our small business. We have to, I think one of the biggest barriers we have is small business financing, especially in those adjacent black butterfly neighborhoods that are sort of the rush through neighborhoods now. And examples like the Perkins redevelopment is such a visionary possibility for us, because that's going to be a completely transformed neighborhood or cluster of neighborhoods. They're not displacing anybody. So all the people who are there are going to stay there, but they're going to expand the neighborhood with a lot of public-private investment in people, investment in public spaces, investment in business. And I think that's an example of how we can build connector neighborhoods and connecting corridors that really connect downtown with the wings of the butterfly.
I love that. I may borrow that. I'll give you credit. So when you think about downtown and the connection of all of that, it's really everybody's backyard, right? It's connected as such. It's where we come to ring in the new year or to host a Ravens victory parade. We talk about the Orioles everywhere, but it's also where, you know, our community recently saw that people come to demand change, right? So that our voices can be heard. So you see the important role within the entire region. How do you think we take advantage of that?
Well, I think, and we talked about this before, I think one of the great things we can do is build on our strengths, that we're doing a lot of the right things. And we can look forward to 2 big anniversaries that are coming up. And, you know, we're kind of the on-ramp to those big celebrations and make Baltimore a great celebration point. One is 2029, the 300th anniversary of Baltimore City, and 2032 and 2034, the 400th anniversary of Maryland. And the reason it's 2 years is King Charles signed the charter for the Maryland colony in 1632, but the ship didn't get here till 1634. And so we have a 2-year, just like the War of 1812, we have 2 years of celebration, and we can stretch it to 5 between 2029 and 2034. And so I think one of the great things that we can celebrate, because of course, colonial history is, especially now in the age of Black Lives Matter, it's a troubled history. And we have people and organizations in Baltimore where I think we can model how do we do a reset in what's been a racially troubled culture and do social repair and community repair and model how do you, we've got several years to figure out how to do that, to come together as we are a majority city of color. Let's celebrate that. Let's bring together the diverse people and organizations and invest in our people, invest in our public spaces, invest in our minority businesses, invest in all the things that really drive wealth creation. Human flourishing is the moral measure of wealth.
I love it. And you're absolutely right. The great thing, and I think what's really inspiring right now, is that you're not just hearing it in communities of color, you're hearing it across the world, but more particular, every meeting that I've been in recently, I know we're at Downtown Partnership, every board, everybody's having that conversation. And it's not just, let's throw some money at it. It's really, let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how we start to do more. So the last question for you, and I know we have to transition, this is going back to some of the residents that you talked about. You touched on these points, but I'd love for you to bring it home when we talk about our nearly 43,000 residents that are here. How do we really create that place that you're talking about that's exciting for all the visitors, but also meaningful for the people who all live and work here?
Well, I think we're on the right path again, because we're really investing in how do we make this city livable for the people who are here. If you go to visit a place, whether it's Rome or Portugal, any city in the world, you don't go there to find another banana republic. You go there to see how is it that people are living here? What kind of culture are they creating? What makes this city tick? And so if we make our city tick for ourselves, that's what's going to draw people here to see how do they do things in Baltimore. And I think we have an opportunity to show the world how we do things here. And I just want to cite one example. When we had this huge demonstration in Baltimore, which was just fabulous, we there were a few incidents, but basically it was peaceful. I saw policemen giving hard hugs to protesters, and I saw them handing out water and sharing their water. I mean, it was just beautiful to see. We can do more and more and more of that. And that's what people want to see. How do you live well in your city? How does everybody live well?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Lindsay, thank you so much. Please don't leave us. I just need to turn things over for a minute. Councilman Costello, I know he's going to talk with Dr. Frick about just what's happening here on our home front. Thank you so much, and we'll be back. Councilman Costello.
Thanks, Yolanda. Dr. Frick, how you doing this morning?
Councilman, I'm doing just fine. It'd be fine to be Kevin. I like to be on a first name basis.
All right, Kevin, and please call me Eric. Thanks for joining us. You have an incredibly diverse portfolio with Hopkins at the Carey School of Business, which includes the Registrar's Office, the Office of Institutional Data and Analytics, admissions, financial aid, student development, international collaborations. I want to jump into that in a second, but first, tomorrow is a very important milestone for you. It's your 24th anniversary of your move to Baltimore. Can you tell us a little bit about what your expectations for Baltimore were like, where things have gone, and where you see them going from here?
Sure. So I grew up just outside of Philadelphia. So my expectations in Baltimore were shaped by the coming of the aquarium in the late 1970s. A visit I made when I was looking at graduate schools, and I parked where I now realize is Falls Way and Monument, which in 1991 was an interesting place to park and walk across to the School of Public Health. And then I came looking for a job and got to stay at what was then the Tremont Suites, and got to see a very different part of Baltimore, in addition to the School of Public Health in Little Italy. So that was what shaped my view of the city before I had the chance to move here. And then when we looked at houses, once I had taken the job offer at Hopkins, the only neighborhood we really looked at that was in the city was the neighborhood where we've now lived for the entire time since July of '96, up on the north side of the city, just north of Belvedere Square. And it's been really interesting to watch over 24 years. The early part of that was mostly, go from my house to the School of Public Health and back. We had kids, they all went to the Waldorf School of Baltimore over near Sinai Hospital, so that expanded what we knew of the city. All three of my sons have now either graduated from, and one is still at the Baltimore School for the Arts, so that shaped my view of the city. The first one went to Peabody, so we spent a lot of time in Mount Vernon going to concerts and going to dinners. That shaped my view of the city. My middle one is at Micah, looking to return this fall, hoping to get back into their exciting studio space as a sculpture student. So that's a different part of the city. And then as a runner in a very active running community in Baltimore City, I run with people in Patterson Park and Bolton Hill and Fed Hill and downtown. And it's just it's a really amazing city to see. And, with the Cary Business School, where we have the 24th floor of the Legg Mason building, and you take some students and visitors up to that, and you can tell them about, the amazing changes that you can see from there. Everything from the industrial past, looking across to the Domino Sugar plant, to what you can see of the current Under Armour World headquarters, the beginnings of Port Covington, and just the amazing growth that's occurred in the city. And so I think this is a city that is just as gritty as the city I grew up outside of, just as resilient, and has so much going for it in terms of entrepreneurship, opportunities, culture, from, famous museums like the Walters and the BMA, the Peabody Library, to the quirkier side of things. We've gone to the Fluid Movement performances year after year. We've gone to see the Baltimore Rock Opera Society. Every year, A Christmas Carol at the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company. So all of that, and the entrepreneurship, and the local participation in 10,000 small businesses, where small business owners are given a chance to come and learn about growth plans and to develop themselves in concert with various universities and other colleges around the city, is just an amazing place. And so I'm actually, after 24 years, amazingly hopeful for the city, and planning to spend the rest of my days right where we are in the north side of Baltimore, but enjoying the whole city as I go along.
I'm not sure how anyone could not come away optimistic from having just listened to that. I will take a moment to throw in a plug for 3 absolutely world-class arts educational institutions, Micah, Peabody, and Baltimore School for the Arts, all of which I'm incredibly proud to have in the district I represent in the 11th. But thank you for that. I mentioned some of the responsibilities that you have across a pretty broad range. And I was curious if you could talk about how the pandemic has forced you to change your operations and your tactics across each of those programmatic areas.
Sure. Well, we haven't been in the building since the middle of March, except for an occasional visitor here or there who needed to retrieve something. So it really has changed how we work. At the most basic level, it's changed how we've had to educate our students. We used to have a fairly bright line. Online education was over here, on-site education was over here. Over the last 3 months, those two have gotten much more blended. Our students who are already online, they haven't missed a beat. But our students and our faculty who were used to teaching on-site have had to figure things out. Fortunately, we have a great support team at the Cary Business School who helped our faculty and our students learn how to adapt and how to use the best of the technology that we have available to make it as useful and educational and still community building experience as possible. We've had a virtual career fair. We've had virtual award events. We've had virtual commencement. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The admissions process, we used to be able to welcome students to our campus. Now we have to work with them virtually. Meetings with students for everything from sorting out their health insurance and occasional academics ethics issue, advisors meeting with students, that's all gone virtual. And so on the one hand, we can all do our jobs from afar. On the other hand, what I've asked my team to work on more and more each day is what are those ways that we miss that feeling of community, that feeling of why we like to go to the office in the first place, and what are ways that we can work to bring each other together during this time, from having an occasional virtual happy hour to just the dean consistently meeting with both staff and faculty to keep them up to date and provide as much of a community space as possible, or some conversations we've been having recently about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging, where we do small group breakouts in virtual settings. But continue to do that and figure out ways, because inevitably we're still going to be doing at least hybrid in the fall. And figuring out ways to increase that sense of community despite being socially distant from each other. And so that while we have the physical distance, we have the high degree of socialization, because especially in a business school, universities in general, but especially in a business school, that's what people come for.
I know that we're all certainly looking forward to your students returning as soon as possible and as soon as safe. As someone in academia, I'm sure you spend a lot of time focusing on frameworks for analyzing different markets, especially the healthcare market. As you're aware, and as many of our listeners are, healthcare and medical research are a tremendous part of Baltimore City's economy, particularly in downtown. What do you see currently happening in that market? And is there any advice that you could offer folks who are working in that market?
I think the most interesting thing about that market has been the struggles that it's had. On the one hand, we heard about all this need for extra ICUs and testing related to COVID and treatment related to COVID. But if you look at the care other than that, it's been hard for people. I have a friend who's a head and neck cancer surgeon, and she had difficulty figuring out when the OR was going to be available. I have friends in nursing in the community, and they've had some furloughs even while nobody was going for primary care. So I think one of the most interesting questions is, as we begin to start up the economy again, as we begin to have primary care visits again, my dentist reopened recently, so I'm finally having a dental appointment that's long overdue. All of those things that we take for granted in terms of easy access, how do we make sure people can get those again while being as safe as possible, but getting the care that they need, getting the preventive care they need, getting the primary care they need? All of the things that we need to have for a healthy community, because you don't just want to wait until you get the cancer or you get the heart disease or you get the diabetes. You want to screen, you want to provide counseling, and figuring out how to open that up and use the telemedicine that's been developing and increasingly become part of what physicians are doing and getting reimbursed for, while yet having that opportunity for the people who need the blood work, or the people who need an examination after an injury, or the people who need PT to get what they need on site while being safe. And again, being at Johns Hopkins, we're an institution that has thought about this day after day, coming up with our own recommendations for how we keep ourselves safe on campus, as well as giving recommendations for how others might do that. And if we all work together and follow those recommendations, we can keep each other as healthy as possible and minimize the risk of this continuing crisis with COVID-19.
Thanks, Kevin. Before I transition back to Shalonda, is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think the one thing to think about is, we do have students coming back in the fall. We're going to have our part-time evening students on site for the first time in some time. They'll be smaller in number. Our capacity in the classroom is much more limited. But they will hopefully choose to engage, not just with us, but with the businesses around us before and after class. And we're hoping that while many of our international students, because of the current prohibitions on travel, they may not be able to get here this fall, but we're hoping to see them all in January for the spring semester and bring them back and have them ready to be integrated with the Harbor East community and the larger downtown community that we're a part of, engaging, again, not just with us and the businesses right at the Legg Mason building in Harbor East, but the extended businesses and restaurants that they are an active part of when they are here taking classes with us. And thank you very much for the time to speak this morning.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for your continued professional and personal commitment to Baltimore City. Shalonda, back to you.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Kevin. Great insights. We're actually going to transition to one of those students that we talk about now. We're fortunate to have Hao Yu with us. In addition to being an alum of the Carey's Global MBA, he has extensive experience in business and management, and he's currently the CEO of a precision diagnostic company based in San Jose, California. How I know it's early for us here, but it's late for you on the other side of the world. Thank you so much for making time for us for today's webinar.
It's my good pleasure to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know that you work close with Kevin on Carey's international collaboration with China. As president of the school's Beijing Alumni Club, like, how do you see the school adapting for international students and alumni, you know, with global travel, as Kevin mentioned, being limited by the pandemic?
Yeah, I think to answer this question, I would like to dissect this question into two parts. One is how would the school help the international students to get to Baltimore? And I think that's the complication comes into not only the COVID, but also the travel ban too. And the difficulty with getting visa on time, but luckily, you know, from my experience from day one at Carey and Hopkins, we have a very dedicated and professional international student office team. I mean, they provide all kinds of, you know, necessary information for international students, you know, for them to understand the visa process, and if they're, you know, how to contact, you know, which department to contact. To get you know, the required information for them to get to the U.S. and Baltimore. And for example, I think now they have our school also have a like three-phase plan to, you know, how to reopen the school fully. You know, the initial phase, I think, includes some measures like distancing the spacing in the classroom, and also and slowly, you know, get people ready, I think sometimes mentally, to go back to their normal school life. So these information are very important for international students to learn, because they on their minds, they will have all these questions like, will my school still open? Will my school still operate? When my school will reopen? So this information will be channeled through our international student office to our international students, to calm them down, you know, like to release any unnecessary panic or concerns of, you know, whether the school is still functional. And on the other side, I think our school also, I heard from Dean Frick and other colleagues at Carey that we have various options. I heard there are four options for our incoming students, particularly for those international students, where they have a choice of either return in fall or return in spring. And even if they choose to return in spring, I remember they have some kind of options where they can take 1 or 4 or 8 courses online, even if they return physically to Baltimore in spring. So there's all kinds of options for international students to kind of get around, right? Like with their planning, and, you know, with the road visa, the traveling, you know, and now, you know, not only the visa, but also it's very difficult for people to get plane tickets, you know, flying between US and China. Because my colleague just flew back from Beijing to San Jose. I think the cost was $6,000, something like that, right? Wow. So yeah, and then it's lucky for him to get one seat. So right. Yeah, so with all this information and preparedness, I think, you know, if I put myself in the position of a prospective international student, I would feel much better than without this information, because I know our school is functional, they are prepared, and they allow me to choose, you know, from a variety of options to how to schedule my study in order to have, you know, very rich experience at Baltimore and Hopkins and Carey. So, and also, not only our international student office is helping us, but also other offices at Carey is also very helpful. Like, for example, I know, you know, the Beijing Alumni Club is working closely with our alumni office and career office to provide virtual sessions between alumni and current students.
Okay.
To help them with especially those who are actually graduating this year, because now they also have a set of questions they need to address. For example, whether they opt to return to their home prior or earlier than or before the ceremony, the graduation ceremony, or what the world would like if they return home, right? Like whether they can find a job in China, right, or in their home countries. So we are actually working with alumni office and career office we had two webinar sessions and one in the planning that we're going to link our alumni from China and with our students who are looking for opportunities in China, so that they understand that, okay, so what is happening in China? What would happen if they opt to return home?
Right.
So we're doing all kinds of things just to share the information, making sure that our students, both current and prospective, they're getting the correct information, and also provide them with options whether they can choose, whether they choose to stay or not, and when to come. So I'm pretty confident that Carrie is very, very well prepared. And also, speaking of the virtual or online class, I've talked with several faculties who are actually, giving lectures online. From my understanding and my conversation with them, I felt that we have a very solid and robust online education system. Not only the technology part, but also the preparedness of our faculties. I mean, they are now very expert in how to kind of managing the whole process to make sure that the students opt to choose online education, getting the same experience as those who are sitting in the classroom. So I'm pretty confident, and I'm very grateful for our school to prepare those informations and options for our students.
Which I think is phenomenal. I think you're right. Hopkins overall, I think, has been a leader in what's happening when you keep referencing sort of the preparedness. And so I know a lot of us are following the guidelines and protocols and a number of things that were established there. The connection also to China, what we're recognizing on this side is sort of following and modeling behind what's happening over in China. You guys are several months ahead of where we are with the US in terms of the disease spread and early waves of recovery. And so what has that experience been like?
Well, I think the experience is two-phased, because the first one is, the whole city is in lockdown, everything closes, and business, especially the mom and pop shops went out of business, and there's nobody on streets. The streets of the city are empty, and people feel, a panic is kind of the main keyword. But as the curve goes back down, people start to, the city starts to reopen. People start to kind of go back to the normal business. But there are some things that will probably not go back to exactly the way it used to be. For example, many companies are actually thinking seriously about maybe putting the work from home as a long-term strategy, right? Because they now start to ask the question whether we need everybody to sit in their office from Monday to Friday. Maybe it's better if they, have some sort of flexibility. But now Beijing is actually hit by a second wave, as we speak. So, but I think now people and businesses are actually more and better prepared because they've seen that and done that and been there. So they say, okay, it's a disease, it's an outbreak, people's lives are lost. But it's not the end of the world. We are still want to live our lives. We still love our city. We love our jobs. So so I think people are not no longer that panic, and the cities also have a well prepared plan for that. So I think that's going to be probably happening in many other cities around the world. And I think the key lessons I learned from that is never lose hope, because our life continues. And I'm sure Baltimore will go back to normal and even better. So hope is the key word
hope is the key word, because what you gave is you did give some inspiration. So thank you, because as we anticipate the second wave, it's what should we look forward to? You answered that, and sort of my last question for you, and I think you've already answered it, was because you also have a business. It was, what are some of the things that you learned about kind of managing in this crisis?
Well, I think for my business is first to secure your supply chain, for many manufacturing businesses, because, the travel is, the travel ban and the reduction in freight capacity makes the globalization of supply chain really a challenging, topic for us. So I would think, business needs to be agile or flexible and prepare for the unknown. Like, for example, whether, what would happen if a pandemic or some other, disaster happens. Like, do you have the flexibility for the workforce to work from home or work from anywhere in the world? And whether your supply chain is able to respond to the customer. That like, for example, if your manufacturing site is in China, but your R&D center is in the US and you have customers in the UK, if everything goes right, there's nothing wrong with that. But then, if something happens, then you need, you need to be able to plan for those. So I think that's the most challenge that I face, and I think that's probably a lesson or a challenge for most other companies too.
From the wise to the wise. So thank you so much. Thank you, Hal, Kevin, Lindsay. You brought us valuable experiences, insights today for our State of Downtown discussion. We're fortunate to have the great minds of Hopkins. We also have the University System of Maryland here, and so many other cutting-edge scholar and entrepreneurs in downtown Baltimore, helping us innovate through this pandemic and this economic recovery. These assets are just some of the reasons why I'm optimistic about downtown's future. And so the future for all of us, although it's uncertain right now, we fight during the pandemic of COVID-19. We layer on top of that the social injustice that's happening. And so there's a lot going on. But what's certain is that if we face these challenges with our eyes wide open, if we do this together, what we know is downtown Baltimore has the assets, the talent, the human capital, all of that to remain a top destination for businesses, residents, and visitors. My team at Downtown Partnership and I, we've been working tirelessly, literally, to assist our constituents in the communities with COVID-19 recovery through the spring. And we're going into overdrive on this in our efforts as we continue to see the city and participate in the city's reopening. So I want to thank the many businesses who continue to support our efforts. Like I said, we couldn't do it without them. I know, Mark, you also thank them, but just want to celebrate them one more time. Today's presenting sponsor, Gallagher, Evelius and Jones, our leadership sponsors, the Baltimore Development Corporation, M&T Bank, and T. Rowe Price, our patron sponsors, the Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business, Vicinity Energy, and the Daily Record, and our community partners, BCT Architects and the Whiting Contractor Company. I also want to thank my incredible team. Literally, they are amazing for all the work that they did on this report. And every day, I want to thank our board. We have an amazing board. Have to give a shout out to my board chair, Marc Wasserman, Councilman Costello. Kudos, kudos, kudos. You two work tirelessly, often behind the scenes, and I just know that we're lucky to have you. Last but not least, I want to thank everybody that attended today, the Downtown Partnerships membership. I mean, this is important for all of us to do together. So once again, just want to remind you, the webinar will be available on our website, godowntownbaltimore.com. You can also track our process and get the latest news and updates by following us on our social channels. You can see them there, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.